One day, Thomas wasn't feeling well. He was having trouble building up steam.
"You must go to the works, Thomas. Probably just some faulty tubes we can easily fix."
And Edward came to take Thomas away.
Cheer up, you'll be back in service in no time.
The Fat Controller brought Boko to help while Thomas was away, and Mavis also lent a hand with the goods work. Daisy sometimes had to pull rolling stock as well, if the other engines were too busy. She didn't mind pulling coaches like Henrietta or Victoria, but the one thing she hated more than ever were trucks.
"Thomas has quite fine coaches."
Annie and Clarabelle were flattered.
Ooh, we do like him.
Indeed, but the idea of pulling your passengers is getting obsolete.
Isn't that the definition of a train?
What I mean is, with more diesel rail cars like me, the passengers would be in the locomotive, and there would be no need for fussing about shunting coaches.
Oh, do excuse me, you must go. Let's get these passengers to their destination.
I get them to their destination, and precisely on time as well. Later, Daisy was resting in her shed when the Fat Controller came looking very anxious.
"Daisy, please do me a huge favor, and take some trucks from Farquhar to the quarry, please."
Daisy glared. Trucks! Sir, can't Mavis do it?
"Mavis is extremely busy. Thomas would normally do this job."
What about Percy, then?
"Just do it, please."
Daisy growled and scuttled to Farquhar. There were only 5 trucks, but they were very old and dirty. Daisy was disgusted. Trucks! The indignity! She coupled up to the trucks and headed off to Enofa Quarry. It's a very short distance from Farquhar to the quarry, but engines have to go very slow because the railway is old and extremely windy. At first, only engines with cowcatchers could ride on it, as Thomas found out with a policeman. But the law has since been changed because farmers are smart enough not to let their livestock roam around near a quarry. Daisy enjoyed the line because she rarely went on it, but did not like going slow, especially while pulling dirty trucks. At this speed, we'll be at the quarry by Christmas. Come on, driver, this is pathetic. Now, Daisy, you know the speed limit is 15 miles per hour. Besides, we're almost there. Daisy growled as she strolled over the magnificent stone bridge. At last, she reached the quarry. Mavis was pleased to see her, but was too busy shunting to say hello. The foreman spoke to Daisy's driver.
"Thanks for bringing these, but could you bring them onto the mineshaft line? Therefore, Mavis can just push them into the mineshaft."
"Will do." Daisy's driver was in a hurry to get the job done. He jumped in Daisy's cab, pulled the reverser, and accidentally put the throttle to maximum. He didn't realize this, and leaned out of the door to watch where Daisy was going. Then, it happened. He suddenly realized the throttle was on full, but then he lost his balance and fell out of Daisy. Daisy kept going on without him.
"Oh no!
God damn it! Help! Stop me!" But Daisy had already left the quarry and raced faster and faster down the line.
"Contact Farquhar, quickly!"
"She'll derail on the quarry line going that fast around the bends." Fortunately, Daisy didn't, but she was extremely frightened when she whipped around them. Dear God! Woo! The trucks were delighted.
On, faster, faster, eh?
At Farquhar, workmen waited at the station to jump onto Daisy and stop her. However, they didn't know how fast she was actually going.
"Here she comes! Get ready!"
But Daisy was going so fast that when the workmen tried to jump onto her footplate, they bounced off like bouncy balls and severely injured themselves. "What are you trying to do, dent me?" Daisy rocketed by Boca with Annie and Clarabelle.
Oh my goodness! What are you doing, Daisy?
Having a very frightening experience, that's for sure! All trains on the branch line were halted and diverted into sidings. Percy and Gordon sat waiting at Elsbridge.
A runaway? Probably another line of trucks who someone forgot to couple. Those little buggers. And delaying my train because of them too.
Or it could be. Help!
What the dickens?
Good Lord!
There was no way to stop Daisy by jumping on her, so when the Fat Controller heard the news, he hatched a plan.
I know. Henry and James aren't taking passenger trains right now.
The Fat Controller rushed to Knapford.
Leave your trains here. I need your help. Quickly.
And the engines were positioned in according to plan.
Let me get this straight. You want us to act like buffers? Like Daisy would crash into us at full speed?
With all due respect, sir, I think it would be easier to simply have an engine chase Daisy and grab her with a rope, like Edward did to me.
You were only going like 45 miles per hour and you weren't pulling anything.
Edward's right. Daisy could be going about 90, and she's probably already past Tidmouth at this rate, so it'd be virtually impossible for an engine going the same direction as her to catch up with her.
Sir Topham Hatt was right. Daisy was beyond Tidmouth and thundered through Henry's tunnel.
Someone better save me or I will sue this wretched railway!
He's coming. Go backwards, so the impact won't be as strong. Brace for impact!
Oh, come on.
You've gotta be kidding!
Henry and James put every ounce of steel into their brakes, but Daisy was still going too fast.
Go on, use your brakes! We're trying, goddammit!
Eventually, they reached the Little Western, but still weren't slowing down.
Oh, it's useless. I'm going into Daisy's cab.
And the driver climbed out, made his way along Henry's boiler as they thundered through Elsbridge Halt. The driver then climbed onto Daisy and had a bit of trouble opening the door, but managed to jump in.
All right, on the count of 3, slam on the brakes. 1, 2, 3!
And he slammed on Daisy's brakes. All 3 engines braked so hard that sparks flew from their wheels. The trucks caused a bit of a challenge, but the train was slowly slowing down. At last, the train came to a complete stop. The engines were all exhausted.
And we have officially stopped.
The crew all cheered. The engines were too exhausted to say anything, but made a feeble smile.
Feeble?
Edward came with the Fat Controller on board.
Well done, Henry and James. And Daisy, this was purely an accident, so you are not to blame.
Well, that's a relief.
I've got no work right now, so I can take those trucks back to the quarry if you want.
That would be much appreciated, Edward.
Also, Thomas has been repaired, so he'll be back tomorrow.
So there will be no more trucks for you to take. You don't mind, do you?
Oh, please. Trucks are dirty and smelly. I'm highly strung, and anything smelly
is bad for your swerves. We know it.
Dear friends, despite what many assume, our Fat Controller is a kind man. He prefers steam that sees the value in all engines, regardless of their type. Nowhere is this more evident than his willingness to give Bear another chance, while also saving Oliver from scrap. Many engines dream of calling the island of Sodor their home. Dudley was determined to make it his reality. These stories will tell you what happened. Sincerely, the author.
It was 2 days before Christmas. Many children were expected on the island of Sodor. All the engines were busy with the final preparations. Sir Topham Hatt wanted this year's carol party to be an extra special celebration. Sir Topham Hatt was now waiting impatiently for Thomas. "Quickly now," he said. "Our Christmas tree has arrived just in time. I want you to fetch it, Thomas. Duck can look after Annie and Clarabelle until you get back." "Will we be able to sing carols too?" asked Thomas. "We'll see," promised Sir Topham Hatt. "It would be nice to sing carols again," sighed Thomas as he set off on his important mission. Thomas collected the tree safely, but large snowdrifts lay ahead. "I mustn't be late," he thought. "Sir Topham Hatt is relying on me." Whistling bravely, Thomas tried to move, but he couldn't. There was worse to come. Thomas was snowed under. Meanwhile, the other engines waited and waited. They were grumbling about Thomas for being late. "Silence," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Thomas left the work safely, but snow has brought the telephone lines down. We must assume he is stranded." The engines now felt sorry for Thomas, and cold but confident, the twins set off to the rescue. Suddenly, they came to a drift that was deeper than the rest. "Help!" "Hush," said Donald. "I can hear something." "Probably the wind," said Douglas. "Help!" "No, listen," insisted Donald. "Over here!" "Oh, it's Thomas. Come on, the poor wee engine must be frozen to the frames in there." When the workmen arrived, it took some time to decide how to dig away the heavy drifts of snow. Thomas's driver and fireman, who had taken shelter at a nearby cottage, joined the rescue. At last, Thomas and the precious Christmas tree were freed from the snowdrift. Then they set off once more to finish their long journey. Sir Topham Hatt greeted them warmly. "As a reward for all your hard work, you may go and enjoy the carols. Be quick now." At the big station, all was soon ready. 1, 2, 3! Suddenly, like magic, the station was flooded with lights. "Ladies and gentlemen and children, I give you 3 cheers for Thomas the Tank Engine and all his friends who have made this occasion possible." Then there was a familiar whirring sound. Percy and Toby smiled. They knew who it was. With landing lights shining brightly, Harold the helicopter touched down gently in the snow. Bringing the greatest surprise of all, Santa Claus. Everyone cheered and the party began. "It's no fun getting stuck in the snow," whispered Thomas to Percy, "but it was worth it for this party. Happy holiday, Percy. Happy holiday, everyone."
Oh, shh, he's coming.
What's the matter, Edward? You don't seem so cheerful. You want to talk about it?
Well, a car ran across my train. Oh, stop it, you two. It's not funny.
No, because how do you just let that happen? Oh, Edward, you must have been going like 0.5 miles per hour.
No, I was going moderately fast and I could have hurt the poor thing. She broke right through it and the conductor was left behind in the brake van.
He left the conductor behind!
Oh, come on now. Grow up, you two.
He probably came out of the brake van like, hey, wait a minute. Where'd the train go?
Now look here, you two. Never mind them, Edward. You couldn't help it. They've never met cows. I have, and I know the trouble they are.
Now for the voice of experience.
What's the big deal? They're only animals. They're probably only trouble to you two because you're weak old engines.
I am the pride of the line. The cow wouldn't dare do that to me. I'd show it.
What? What's so funny?
Oh, nothing, Gordon. Anyway, if a cow is on the line, all you need to do is blow your whistle loudly, and it'll run off. And if it doesn't run off, you collide into it full speed. Oh, Henry. You're saying run it over? Run it over, with all the blood and guts splattering your wheels.
That's awful, Henry.
No, Henry's got the right idea. I'm going to do just that next time a cow dares go against me. Oh, wait. No, you're not. What? I was joking, Gordon. You're not killing a cow. You're not killing a cow, Gordon.
That was a joke?
Yes, it was a joke, Gordon. I love animals. You know that. I don't, actually. You've got a sick sense of humor, Henry. I thought you were being serious.
No, I wasn't. Why would I encourage you to maim a cow in front of your passengers, Gordon? What the hell is wrong with you?
The hell is wrong with you? You're the one talking about blood and guts all over your wheels.
I was joking.
Watch, it's funny. Did I say something funny? You think killing cows is funny, Toby?
Oh, my God. You know what? I can't deal with this right now.
Spamcan seemed to return to Sodor far too often for his own liking, or anyone else's. On a late winter afternoon, he delivered a goods train from the other railway. He went to rest at the sheds. A chorus of groans sounded upon his arrival. "I am thoroughly bewildered," he moaned dramatically, "as to why I'm forced onto your metals time and again. It's practically magnetism. I suppose it must be nice for your railway to be graced by modernity. I'd say you're lucky I'm here." "We'd be lucky if you weren't," sneered Gordon. "We get on just fine without you around." "Well, that's up for debate," glared Spamcan. "Never mind that I can do double your work in a fraction of the time. But I brought precious sand to get you through this cold spell. Not that I care for the stuff. We diesels never lose our grip on the rails, but whatever keeps you kettles boiling." "You've brought the sand, have you?" Sir Topham Hatt stood close by. "Why, yes, sir," replied Spamcan with false sincerity. "Anything to keep your fine railway running." "And where, pray tell, is it?" "Come again, sir?" "The Sand 199. As you're so certain of its whereabouts, perhaps you could explain why it's not with the rest of your train." I'll tell you," interrupted Sir Topham Hatt. "It seems you kicked up such a fuss about having to come to my fine railway that you left before the last trucks could be coupled to your train. What do you suppose they contained?" "Oh dear," blushed Spamcan. "I would suggest you make yourself comfortable," continued Sir Topham Hatt. "Due to bridge work, you won't be going home tonight. You can help with the goods traffic tomorrow. At least then you can be somewhat useful. Good day to you." The engines chuckled in delight, except Edward. "I'm worried," he sighed. "Driver says a hard frost is coming tonight, and my sandboxes are rather low." "Humph!" pouted Spamcan. "Modern engines aren't concerned with such trivial matters. Sand, indeed. Is this a railway or a playground? Just stand aside and let me handle things, old-timer." The other engines hissed, but Edward stayed silent. The next day, Edward collected his passengers. His driver was right. Frost coated the rails, and he'd witnessed the other engines wheel slipping all morning. Right, Edward thought as the guard's whistle blew. Nice and steady. We'll be all right. Edward puffed steadily along, dropping sand if he felt he had no grip. Thankfully, the morning sun helped melt the frost. That's good, he smiled. But the sun was no use in the tunnel. It was dark and frigid, and the frost clung hard to the rails. As Edward steamed through, his wheels slipped, and the coaches dragged him to a snail's pace. Come on, he groaned. He tried to drop more sand, but his sandboxes were depleted. Go on, Edward, called the driver. You're nearly there. Then there was trouble. Edward was puffing so hard, his smoke began to fill the tunnel. The driver and fireman covered their noses with their jackets. Nearly there, huffed Edward. With one final effort, he burst into the daylight, and his wheels found their grip once more. Brilliant, old boy, well done, cheered his crew. From the opposite direction, Spam Can came trudging along with his goods. Looking a little worse for wear, eh, old iron? He chortled with delight. Oh dear, Edward thought. He won't like my smoke in the tunnel. He didn't. What's going on? He coughed, shutting his eyes. Oh, help! Oh, fire! Oh, I'm too reliable to go up in flames. He was too startled to notice the frosty rails, and the heavy train had dragged him to a complete standstill. The guard ran back to the last station. Edward was resting when the guard arrived and asked for help. I'm sorry, sir, sighed Edward, but I've got no sand left. A train like that would be too much for me without it. That wretched diesel is nothing but bad luck, hissed Gordon. Is this a railway or a playground? He's certainly treating it like the latter. That's it, cried Edward. Gordon, you're brilliant. He turned to his driver. There's a school near the station, and their playground has plenty of sand. I'm sure we could borrow some given the situation. The driver, fireman, and guard wasted no time. They trudged over to the school, filled buckets with sand, and when they'd returned, Edward's sandboxes were full once more. Off we go, he whistled determinedly. By now, the smoke had cleared from the tunnel. Spam Can hadn't noticed. His eyes were shut tight, and he continued to shudder and whinge as his wheels spun. All these years of service, only for it to end on this rotten island. It's curtains for me. Tell my fitter I made it out of the tunnel in the end. Spam Can cracked open one eye. There was Edward, buffering up in front. Spam Can eyed the smoke wafting from his funnel and realized at once what happened. Oh my. Perhaps I got a bit caught up in all the excitement. Well, let's get you moving so the others can get caught up. You've delayed them with all this running on the spot. Slowly and carefully, Edward pulled Spam Can and the train free of the tunnel. The sand did the trick, and he had no trouble with the icy rails. When they reached the station, Edward chuckled. Not too shabby for an old iron, wouldn't you say? Spamcan didn't say. He left later that day, much to the delight of the others. It was strange then when he returned the following morning with only a few trucks. Finally brought that sand dune steamers were clamouring for, he muttered, trying not to make eye contact. Edward noticed one of the trucks was still coupled as Spamcan moved off. I say, keeping some for yourself? Your fat controller says I'm to take it to the schoolyard as repayment. Such work is beneath me, he growled. I'm sure the children will be pleased, Edward smiled. And you can use some of it yourself if you slip again. I'm sure you wouldn't mind that beneath you, eh? Spamcan's only reply was a disgruntled honk.
Boko enjoyed taking the night goods. The evening air was crisp, and it was nice running with no other engines around. Best of all, the trucks were too busy sleeping to cause any mischief. One foggy evening, he arrived on the other railway right on time. He parked his trucks and made his way to the shed. The yard was big, but Boko never had any trouble finding his way. Tonight, however, the fog was so thick he had completely lost his bearings. Strange, he muttered to himself. I'm certain the sheds were around here. Suddenly, Boko could see the outline of a building ahead. Finally, he smiled. His relief was short-lived. As he drew closer, he saw it wasn't the big shed where the mainland diesels slept. It was smaller and more akin to the old sheds on Sodor. It was shabby and looked as if it had been vacant for a long time. A shed's a shed, old fellow, sighed his driver. We'll go mad trying to find our way in this fog any longer. Boko was uneasy. Something felt odd. But he didn't want to navigate through the fog any further. He rolled silently into the shed and said good night to his driver. Now, Boko was alone. He stared out into the yard. All was silent. No trucks being pushed around, not even the distant sound of diesel horns. It was as if the fog muffled the world around him. Why, hello! Boko jumped. Beside him was an old tender engine. His blue paint was marked with soot, and his face was smudged. Dark, heavy bags hung under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept for days. It's not often I have visitors, he said in a warm but weary tone. At last, Boko found his voice. I'm sorry, he stuttered. I didn't mean to intrude. My driver and I got lost in the fog and— No need to apologize, chuckled the engine. Fog can lead you places you don't expect to be. Besides, it's nice to have company for a change. Well, thank you, smiled Boko. I must admit, I am surprised. I've been taking the night goods for years, but I've never seen this shed before. Or you, for that matter. The old engine chuckled again. You're not the only one. Seems I'm invisible to most who work here. The engine eyed Boko up and down. You're a Sodor engine, aren't you? How did you know? You're different from the diesels that live around these parts. Much more courteous for a start. I was a Sodor engine too, many moons ago. Boko was surprised. Yes, it's true, laughed the engine, spying the look of shock on Boko's face. Used to work at the big station. Lovely place it was. The engine sighed and looked down at his buffers. Oh, Only wish I'd appreciated it more at the time. Why don't you return? Asked Boko. I'm sure the Fat Controller would welcome you back with open arms. Oh, no, stammered the engine. He didn't have the patience for an engine like me. Nonsense, smiled Boko. He certainly wouldn't want to see you in a state like this. Tell you what, come back with me tomorrow. The old engine ignored this. Tell me, he asked, is Edward still around? Oh, yes, replied Boko. I work on his branch line. Ah, I am glad to hear it, smiled the engine. A kind soul he was. I only wish I'd been as kind to him. What did you say your name was? Asked Boko. Oh, it's getting late, yawned the old engine. We'd better get some sleep now. We'll finish our chat in the morning. Boko was curious why the engine wouldn't answer his question, but had to admit he was feeling drowsy, and it wasn't long before he fell asleep. Boko's sleep was anything but peaceful. All night long he dreamt of scrapyards. Old engines were lined up in the sidings, their shadows dancing in the flicker of the cutter's torch. Violent red light illuminated the inside of a shed, and all Boko could hear were the muffled pleas for mercy, drowned in the sound of searing metal. Boko woke with a start. It was daylight now, the fog burned off by the morning sun. He breathed a sigh of relief that his dream was over. I hope I didn't keep you up, he said, addressing the old engine. I had an awful... He stopped. The old engine and the shed were gone. At that moment, two of the mainland diesels rolled past. You'll do a number on your engine staying out in the cold all night, said one. But, stuttered Boko, where's the shed? And the engine? Batty old Boko, laughed the other diesel. Strange breed, those Sodor engines. The diesels rolled away, laughing. When Boko's driver arrived, he was surprised too. Sheds don't just disappear, he said, scratching his head. It was then that he noticed something on the ground beside the rails. He bent down for a closer inspection. I think it's a number plate, he said. 87546. Could we take it back with us? Asked Boko. The driver brought the number plate into the cab. Boko set off for home with much on his mind. He didn't know what to make of the old engine, the disappearing shed, or his dream. He did know, however, that he'd be having a long talk with Edward.
Winter on the island of Sodor can be windy and cold. When the cold wind blows, the engines can't wait to get back to the snug warmth of Tidmouth sheds. Bitter cold, bitter cold, bitter cold, chuffed Toby. Still, I'll soon be back in my nice dry shed. But suddenly, Toby's driver applied the brakes. He could see a farmer standing knee-deep in snow. He was waving a red flag. My phone lines are down. All the roads are blocked. And my sheep have just started lambing, the farmer said. They're trapped on the hillsides, cut off by the snow. What can we do to help? Toby chuffed. I need a vet as quickly as possible. We'll stop at the next signal box, said Toby's driver. I'll phone the vet from there. Toby raced to the signal box, and the driver phoned ahead to the station. Sir Topham Hatt and the vet were waiting for Toby as he arrived. The farmer's lambs are stranded on the hillside, cried Toby. We've got to rescue them. So we shall, said Sir Topham Hatt. I'll send Duck right away. This is a job for an engine with a snowplow. Toby knew Duck was the right engine for the job. He was very powerful. Hurry, Toby called anxiously as Duck chuffed out of the station. But so much snow had fallen, the tracks ahead were blocked. We can't go on, said Duck's driver grimly. We'll have to go back. Toby was surprised to see Duck return to the station. I tried my hardest, puffed Duck, but the weather's getting worse. Even Duck's snowplow can't get through, said his driver. Then Toby had an idea. My old branch line runs out there, sir. Remember? It's far too dangerous, said Sir Topham Hatt. It would never carry Duck's weight. It might take my weight, said Toby. And I know that line like the back of my buffers, he added. It's our only chance to help the lambs. Sir Topham Hatt agreed, but he told Toby to be very careful. Soon, a blizzard was howling. Toby's driver was worried. I can do it, called Toby, as long as these rails hold. But Toby had forgotten about the rickety old bridge. Help! My wheels are wobbling, he cried. His driver fought for control as Toby struggled on. I've got to reach the other side of this bridge, gasped Toby. Those lambs need me. The farmer was waiting. It was very cold. Suddenly, a ghostly glowing eye shone through the snowstorm. It was Toby's headlamp. You made it, cried the farmer. What a brave engine you are. The vet and the farmer went to find the lambs. But they soon returned. The lambs are safe and sound, Toby, said the vet. But we need a place now to keep the little ones warm. Toby smiled. I think you'll find Henrietta has plenty of room. Toby stayed for several days, just to make sure the lambs were all right. The farmer was very grateful. Thank you, Toby, he said. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, said Toby. There's nothing I like better than helping out a friend in need.
It was a cold winter's morning on the island of Sodor. The wind was bitter and the ground hard with frost. Thomas and Percy were cold and cross. All I want is a warm boiler, huffed Thomas. Firelighter knows that. He's late. He's not late, replied Percy. This weather woke us up early. Gusts of wind swirled round the shed, tossing flakes of snow toward Thomas. Then they swooshed round Percy, too. Why don't we talk about something else? Shivered Percy. Yes, replied Thomas. Like how silly we'll look when our funnels turn into icicles. That's not funny. Maybe we'll stop feeling cold if we talk about warm things. Like sunshine and steam. And firelighters, muttered Thomas. Scarves, continued Percy. Scarves? Laughed Thomas. That's what you need, Percy. A woolly scarf round your funnel. Thomas was only teasing, but Percy thought happily about scarves until the firelighter came. Sir Topham Hatt was enjoying hot porridge for breakfast. He was looking forward to taking important visitors on a tour of the railway and had pressed his special trousers. I shall put them in my trunk, Sir Topham Hatt said to his wife, and change into them just before the photographs are taken. Then he set off to catch his train. Percy was now working hard. His fire was burning nicely, and he had plenty of steam, but he still thought about scarves. He saw them everywhere he went. My funnel's cold, he puffed. I want a scarf, I want a scarf. Rubbish, Percy, said Henry. Engines don't wear scarves. Engines with proper funnels do, replied Percy. You've only got a small one. Before Henry could answer, Percy puffed away. Henry snorted. He was looking forward to pulling the special train. It was time for the photographs. Everyone was excited. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform for his trousers. They were in a trunk amongst a big load of baggage. The porters were taking the baggage trolley across the line. They were walking backwards to see that nothing fell off. Percy was still being cheeky. His driver always shut off steam just outside the station. Percy wanted to surprise the coaches by coming in as quietly as he could. But the porters didn't hear him either. Percy gave them such a fright that boxes and bags burst everywhere. "Oh," groaned Percy. Sticky streams of jam trickled down Percy's face. A top hat hung on his lamp iron. Worst of all, a pair of trousers coiled lovingly around his funnel. Everyone was very angry. Sir Topham Hatt seized the top hat. "Mine," he said. "Percy, look at this." "Yes, sir. I am, sir." "My best trousers, too." "Yes, sir. Please, sir." "We must pay the passengers for their spoiled clothes, and my trousers are ruined. I hope this will teach you not to play tricks with the coaches." Percy went off to the yard. He felt very silly. On the way, he met James. "Hello, Percy. So you found a scarf, eh? But legs go in trousers, not funnels." And he puffed away to tell Henry the news. That evening, Thomas and Percy were resting in the shed. Percy's driver had taken away the trousers and given Percy a good rub-down. "Firelighters promised to come early tomorrow," said Thomas. Henry arrived. He'd enjoyed taking the visitors around and now felt sorry for Percy, too. "Driver says the weather will be warmer tomorrow. You won't need a scarf, Percy." "Certainly not," replied Percy. "Engines don't need scarves. Engines need warm boilers. Everyone knows that."
Hello there again, smudger.
Albert.
Yes, it is me.
What are you doing in here?
I have been wrongly accused, let's say. And what about you?
I guess I could say the same. So now what?
What do you mean, now what?
Well, remember last time we spoke to each other? You will all regret this and I will be back thing.
But that was decades ago. Trust me, I'm a totally different engine now. What do you say we make up and become proper cellmates? Hell, I can even show you the ropes.
Okay then. That sounds like a good idea.
Gordon was cross. "Why should Henry have a new shape?" he grumbled. "A shape good enough for me is good enough for him. He goes gallivanting off, leaving us to do his work, and comes back saying how happy he feels. It's disgraceful. And there's another thing. Henry whistles too much. No respectable engine ever whistles loudly at stations. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it." Poor Henry didn't feel happy anymore. "Never mind," whispered Percy. "I'm glad you're home again. I like your whistling." "Goodbye, Henry," called Gordon. "We're glad to have you with us again, but remember what I said." Later, Henry stopped at Edward's station. "Hello, Henry," said Edward. "You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday." "Thank you, Edward," smiled Henry. "Shh! Can you hear something?" "It sounds like Gordon," said Edward, "and it ought to be Gordon. But Gordon never whistled like that." It was Gordon. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous rate. He didn't look at Henry, and he didn't look at Edward. He screamed straight through the station and disappeared. "Well," said Edward. "It isn't wrong," chuckled Henry, "but we just don't do it." And he told Edward what Gordon had said. Meanwhile, Gordon screeched along the line. The noise was awful. At the station, everyone covered their ears. Sir Topham Hatt covered his ears too. "Take him away," he bellowed, "and stop that noise." Gordon puffed sadly away, but he wouldn't stop whistling until two fitters climbed up and knocked his whistle valve in place. That night, Gordon slunk into the shed. He was glad it was empty. "It isn't wrong," murmured Henry to no one in particular, "but we just don't do it." No one mentioned whistles. Next morning, Henry was enjoying himself enormously. "I feel so well, I feel so well," he sang. "Trickety-trock, trickety-trock," hummed his coaches. Then he saw some boys on a bridge. "Beep, beep, hello," he whistled. "Oh," he called. The boys didn't wave and take his number. They thought it fun to drop stones on him instead. "They've broken our glass! They've broken our glass!" cried the coaches. The passengers weren't hurt, but they were cross. "Call the police." "No," said the driver. "Leave it to Henry and me." "What will you do?" they asked. "Can you keep a secret?" "Yes, yes." "Well then," said the driver, "Henry is going to sneeze at those boys." Lots of people were waiting at the station just before the bridge. They wanted to see what would happen. "Henry has plenty of ashes," said the driver. "Please keep all windows shut till we've passed the bridge. Henry's as excited as we are, aren't you, old fellow?" Henry felt more stuffed up than excited. Soon they could see the boys, and they all had stones. "Are you ready, Henry?" said the driver. "Sneeze hard when I tell you." "Now," he said. Achoo! "Well done, Henry," laughed his driver. Henry went home, hoping that next time he saw Gordon and the boys, they would have learned not to be so mean.
The Fat Controller's engines love being shiny and clean. It makes them feel cheerful as they puff across the island of Sodor. Percy often has the dirtiest work to do, but he likes to be clean as well as any other engine. So washdowns are important to Percy. But the Fat Controller had bad news. "Due to a water shortage," he said, "no engine shall have more than one washdown a day. Usefulness before cleanliness," he added, and left. Percy was upset. "I get dirty," he complained. "I need washdowns. Gordon only does it to feel important." "I am important," Gordon sniffed. "I'm an express engine." "You're a pouty puffer, Percy," teased James. "No, I'm not," wheezed Percy, and he chuffed away. Percy was loading trucks at the docks. He was trying extra hard to stay clean, but the troublesome trucks were being naughty. As Percy pushed them under the coal chute, they sang out. "On, on, on," they cried. Percy found himself under the chute, and coal dust flew everywhere. "Oh no," coughed Percy, "I'm filthy." Percy felt awful, but he knew he had to carry on. On the way to Callan Station, the troublesome trucks teased Percy even more. "Clickety-clack! Don't look back! Dirty Percy's on our track!" "Be quiet!" Percy snapped. When Percy arrived at Callan Station, he was very upset. "From now on, I'm only doing work where I won't get dirty," he said. Harold the helicopter was at Callan Station picking up medical supplies. "Hello, Percy," he called. and he took off, blowing cinders and ashes everywhere. Not again, Percy cried. I want a washdown. Usefulness before cleanliness, reminded his driver. I want to be useful where I can't get dirty, Percy huffed. There's a load of sugar going to the chocolate factory, his driver said. We could take the sugar trucks. Sugar, said Percy. That's nice and clean. Percy was pleased. Percy didn't know that earlier a leaky truck had spilled oil on the track. When he approached the chocolate factory, his driver applied the brakes, but Percy's wheels just skidded on the oily rails. Oh no! Hooted Percy. Yuck! He groaned. I've never been this dirty. He was covered from funnel to firebox in sticky, gooey chocolate. Back at the sheds, everyone thought it was very funny. You look good enough to eat, Thomas hooted. Pudding, Percy, teased James. Chalk ice on wheels, chipped in Henry. Disgraceful, said Gordon pompously. Ahem, said a stern-sounding voice. It was the Fat Controller. You have had a trying day, Percy, he said. Yes, sir, replied Percy from beneath the chocolate. But you've shown us all that usefulness does come before cleanliness. So, he added, you shall have your washdown. Oh, sir. And a new coat of paint. Percy just beamed.
Hurry up, I'm a busy engine, puffed Henry. Goods arrive night and day at the docks. Sometimes Henry and the other engines work so hard that their axles ache. Sir Topham Hatt brought in a new engine to help with the heavy workload. He was long and had 10 drive wheels. He looked very strong.
This is Murdoch. He's going to be pulling freight on the main line.
Ahoy, matey! Shouted Salty.
Welcome, Murdoch,
called Harvey. You're the biggest engine I've ever seen, cried Thomas.
You're a chatty lot,
Murdoch said quietly. Soon Murdoch was coupled to a long, long line of heavy freight cars. His boilers strained, his wheels started to turn, and the mighty engine chuffed away. Murdoch longed for some peace and quiet. But everywhere he went, it was noisy and crowded. At the end of the day, Murdoch was looking forward to a good night's rest. But Salty and Harvey were full of questions.
What's the longest train you've ever pulled?
Have you ever worked Marseille?
Have you ever crashed? Please, I want some peace and quiet, and I don't want to share a shed with chatterboxes.
No need to be rude, huffed Harvey.
Hey, we're only being friendly, matey.
The next morning, Murdoch collected another long, heavy train. This time, he chuffed into the beautiful countryside. It was splendid. At last, he had some peace and quiet. Suddenly, his driver applied the brakes. There were sheep on the tracks.
The sheep escaped from that field, said the driver, through that broken fence.
The driver and the fireman tried to chase the sheep back. First this way, and then that way. They tried everything, but nothing worked.
We'll never remove these sheep by ourselves, complained the fireman.
I'll go and phone for help, sighed the driver. Murdoch was very unhappy. The noisy sheep were spoiling his peace and quiet. Sir Topham Hatt was enjoying afternoon tea when he got the call.
Sheep? He exclaimed loudly. I'll send Toby with the farmer immediately.
The sheep were becoming noisier and noisier.
Please stop, groaned Murdoch. I'd rather be back with the chatterbox engines.
Just then, Toby chuffed into view.
Toby, exclaimed Murdoch. We're certainly glad to see you.
Before long, the farmer and his dog went to work. And the sheep were soon safely in their field. And Murdoch was on his way again.
Thanks, Toby.
That evening, Murdoch parked between Harvey and Salty. But Murdoch spoke first.
I'm sorry that I was cross, he chuffed. I'm very pleased to share a shed with you.
And we're very pleased to have your company, said Harvey. Aye, we are, added Salty. It reminds me of a story. Murdoch smiled. The sound of ba-ba would have kept him awake, but a salty story would send him happily to sleep.
Gordon the big engine and Thomas the tank engine puffed buffer to buffer back home. It had been a busy day. First, Thomas had teased Gordon about the time that the big engine had slid into a ditch. Then Thomas fell down a mine and Gordon came to his rescue. "Remember, Thomas," called Gordon grandly, "united we stand, together we fall. You help me, and I'll help you." "I'll remember," replied Thomas, "but I hope Sir Topham Hatt forgives us soon." Suddenly they noticed something. As the two engines whistled into the sheds, everywhere they looked, they saw paint pots and painters. "Bust my buffers," said Thomas. "What's happening?" "Shh," whispered Percy. "Sir Topham Hatt's going to tell us now. Ladies and gentlemen and engines, I am honored to inform you that Her Majesty the Queen herself is coming here to visit us. Now, on with the preparations." The engines wondered who would pull the royal train. "I'm too old to pull important trains," said Edward. "I'm in disgrace," sighed Gordon. "He'll choose me, of course," boasted James. "You," snorted Henry, "you can't climb hills." "He will ask me to pull the train, and I'll have a new coat of paint." Then the rain came. Henry's driver and fireman covered up their cab to keep dry. A painter was on the ladder above the line. Henry's smoke blew high into the air. The painter couldn't see. Both he and the paint pot fell all over Henry. Poor Henry. "Well, you're not a pretty picture," sneered the painter. Sir Topham Hatt spoke next. "You look like an iced cake, Henry. That won't do for the royal train. I must make other arrangements." Gordon and Thomas were waiting for him. Please, sir. "One at a time," replied Sir Topham Hatt. "Yes, Gordon?" "May Thomas have his branch line again?" "I think you are both sorry and deserve a treat. Edward will go in front to clear the line. Thomas will look after the coaches, and Gordon will pull the train." The great day came. All the engines worked hard, bringing people to the town. Thomas sorted out their coaches in the yard. Edward steamed in. "Beep! The Queen is here!" Then and Gordon whistled as he approached the station. Everyone knew that sound. The Queen's train glided into the station. Gordon was spotless and his brass shone brightly. Sir Topham Hatt stood to attention. "Welcome, ma'am." The Queen thanked him for a splendid run and asked to see all the engines. "Beep, beep," whistled Toby and Percy. "Shh," hissed Henry and James. But Toby and Percy didn't care. "3 cheers for the Queen!" "Beep, beep," whistled the engines. When it was time to leave, the Queen spoke specially to Thomas, who fetched her coaches. Then to Edward. And finally to Gordon, who took her away. No engines ever felt prouder than those on Sir Topham Hatt's railway.
One winter evening, Henry's driver said, "We'll be out early tomorrow. We've got to take the flying kipper. Don't tell Gordon, but I think if we pull the kipper nicely, Sir Topham Hatt will let us pull the express. The special coal they gave you is working well." "Hooray!" cried Henry. "That will be lovely." All kinds of ships use the harbor at the big station by the sea. There are passenger ships, cargo ships, and fishing boats also come here. They unload their fish on the quay. Some of it goes to shops in the town, and the rest in a special train to other places far away. This is the train the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper. Henry was ready at 5 o'clock. There was snow and frost. Men hustled and shouted, loading up the crates of fish. The last door banged, the guard showed his green lamp, and the Flying Kipper was ready to go. Come on, don't be silly, puffed Henry to the freight cars. The cars shuddered and groaned. Trickety-trock, all right. That's better, puffed Henry. Clouds of smoke and steam poured from his funnel into the cold air, and the fire's light shone brightly. Hurry, panted Henry. They were going well. The light grew better. Signal lights shone green as they passed. Then a yellow signal appeared ahead. His driver prepared to stop, but the home signal was down. All clear, Henry. Away we go. They couldn't know the switches from the main line to a siding were frozen, and the home signal should have been set at danger, but snow had forced it down. A freight train was waiting in the siding to let the Flying Kipper pass, and the driver and fireman were drinking cocoa in the caboose. "The Kipper is due," said the conductor. "Who cares?" said the fireman. "This is good cocoa." The driver got up. "Come on, fireman, back to our engine." They got out just in time. Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash, but Henry lay dazed and surprised. Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. "The signal was down, sir," said Henry. "Cheer up, Henry. It wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident. I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines. They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox. You'll feel a different engine, and you won't need special coal anymore. Won't that be nice?" "Yes, sir," said Henry, doubtfully. Henry liked being at Crewe, but was glad to come home. A crowd of people waited to see him arrive in his new shape. He looked so splendid and strong that they gave him 3 cheers. Beep, beep, he whistled. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to say that a lot of little children are often late for school because they wait to see Henry go by. They often see him pulling the express. He does it so well that Gordon is jealous. But that's another story.
Thomas the Tank Engine was feeling very happy. His blue coat shone in the sun, he was right on time, and all around his branch line, the countryside seemed prettier than ever before. Beep, beep. Good morning, Percy, he whistled. My branch is the pride of the line, wouldn't you agree? Yes, Thomas, of course, but what, Percy? Out with it. Well, there is another engine with a famous branch line, too. Who? Where? His name's Stepney. He's far away, but Sir Topham Hatt says he may visit us. When? Oh, someday. And Percy hurried away. Meanwhile, Stepney was puffing steadily along his line. It isn't very long, and that made him feel a little sad. Later, he saw Rusty. The little diesel had helped save Stepney from scrap. Everyone's been so kind. But my railway is so short, and I do miss a good long run. I think you should tell Driver, too, replied Rusty. I'm sure he'll understand. Stepney soon discovered that indeed he did. Do you know, Stepney, I feel just the same way. That evening he had exciting news. Guess what, Stepney? Sir Topham Hatt has invited us to visit the other engines on his railway. Manager agreed. It'll be a really long run to get there. Oh, thank you, sighed Stepney. They set off next morning. By now, all the other engines were talking about Stepney. He runs a famous branch line. Did you know that? Said Percy. Thomas was feeling a little jealous. Huh. It may be famous, but my branch is the first on the line. Everyone knows that, too. And he huffed away to fetch his coaches. Look, squeaked Percy. Why have they all come? There's no train yet. But Percy was wrong. The signal dropped, and from far away an engine whistled. Here he comes, yelled Douglas. Stepney puffed proudly through the junction. I hope you'll meet Thomas, too, said Edward. You both have branch lines to be proud of. Then Stepney set off to help Duck shunt coaches in the yards, and they worked happily together all afternoon. At last, Thomas arrived. Sorry, can't talk. It's time for my last branch line train. Mustn't be late. He was hardly out of sight when the engines heard shouting at the station. Moments later came the alarm. Stop all trains! The signalman answered the telephone. A special, is it? I see. Thomas was impatient. Why are we waiting? My passengers are being delayed. Sorry, Thomas, said his driver. We're being shunted to allow another train to pass. Soon they heard an unfamiliar puffing sound. There was Stepney with his headlamp swaying and whistle blowing. He gathered speed and disappeared. Well, bust my boiler, said Thomas the Tank Engine. Next morning he was still fuming. Shunted, and on my own branch, too. It's a disgrace. I'm sorry, said Stepney. I was a special. Why? An important passenger arrived just as you left. He ordered a special train, and Duck let me take it. We had a splendid run, but, finished Thomas, it can make an engine nervous not to know the line. Exactly, said Stepney. You're such an expert. Thomas felt much better. He couldn't be cross anymore and began telling Stepney all about his branch line.
Freddy has a heavy load today. It has to be delivered to the transfer yards. First, he has to go up the steep hill. Does Freddy have to puff fast or slow? If he puffs up slowly, the load will pull him back down before he gets to the top. So what should Freddy do? That's right. Freddy has to puff up the steep hill quickly. Now Freddy has to puff down the steep hill. Does Freddy have to puff fast or slow? If Freddy puffs down too fast, his heavy load could push him off the track. So what should Freddy do? Yes, Freddy has to puff slowly down the steep hill. Freddy put on his brakes so he could puff down slowly. Now he can deliver his load safely to the transfer yards. Well done, Freddy. Saving Edward. It was summertime on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard, carrying goods and passengers. They cheerfully chuffed up and down the lines. All except Edward. Edward was worried. He wheezed as he puffed, and steam hissed out of his cylinders. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds. He had an important job for Edward. "A special delivery of fruit and vegetables is coming to the docks today," he told him. "I want you to take it to Knapford." "Yes, sir," said Edward. But he was worried about his wheeze. It felt worse today. "Thomas, you ought to go to the docks and shunt Edward's freight cars. After that, you can carry on with your usual jobs." "Yes, sir," said Thomas eagerly. Thomas and Edward puffed to the water tower. Edward tried to stop wheezing, but he couldn't. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "You don't sound well." "I can't seem to get up steam properly," said Edward. "But I'll manage. Don't tell anyone, Thomas." Thomas wasn't sure about this. "I don't want Sir Topham Hatt to know," hissed Edward. Thomas could see Edward was worried, so he agreed. He hurried off to shunt Edward's freight cars. Edward followed slowly to the docks. Edward was very worried. What if he was too weak to pull his train? He would be of no use to the railway. He wouldn't be useful at all. Edward shuddered at the thought. "Must keep going, must keep going," he wheezed fearfully. At the docks, Thomas had shunted Edward's freight cars into place for him. Soon, Edward was coupled up and ready to go. "Go on, Edward, you can do it," called Thomas encouragingly. Edward puffed as hard as he could, but the train hardly moved at all. "I'm sorry, Thomas," Edward wheezed miserably. "I'm not a really useful engine anymore. Sir Topham Hatt will have to send me for scrap." Thomas was very upset. He wanted to help Edward. "I'll do my other jobs first," Thomas said. "Then I'll pull the train for you." Edward watched Thomas puff away. He wasn't sure if it was right to let Thomas do his job.
Edward felt very worried. Thomas needed to do all his jobs as quickly as possible so that he had time to pull Edward's train. Hurry up, he told the troublesome trucks. What for? What for? They snapped. For Edward, puffed Thomas, and he biffed them crossly. Edward waited sadly by his train. He hoped Thomas would come back soon. When Thomas finished all his jobs, he puffed back to collect Edward's train. Edward was very pleased to see him. Don't worry, Edward, puffed Thomas. I'll have your job done in no time. You go back to Tidmouth and I'll meet you there later. Thank you, Thomas, wheezed Edward. And Thomas pulled away with a long line of freight cars. Thomas was tired. He had been working all day, and Edward's train was very heavy. But he was determined not to let Edward down. Sir Topham Hatt was talking to Gordon as Thomas puffed in. Thomas, this train is late, he said crossly. And why are you pulling it? Where is Edward? Thomas didn't want to get Edward into trouble. He had to think of an excuse. Edward took on the wrong sort of coal, sir. The wrong sort of coal? Boomed Sir Topham Hatt. What nonsense, Thomas! I'll find out what Edward has to say about this later. Sir Topham Hatt was very cross. He gave Thomas another job to do. Yes, sir, said Thomas. Gordon steamed through the countryside. And then he found Edward having a rest. What's all this about the wrong sort of coal? Huffed Gordon. Edward looked puzzled. The wrong sort of coal? Gordon told Edward all about Thomas and Sir Topham Hatt. Edward felt very bad. He wanted to put things right. He decided he must go and see Sir Topham Hatt straight away. Edward hissed and wheezed his way to the station. His fire felt feeble. His wheels felt weak, but he battled on. At last, Edward puffed into the station. He found Sir Topham Hatt. It's all my fault, sir, he said sadly. I asked Thomas not to tell you I couldn't work. I was afraid of going for scrap. I'm very sorry. I should have talked to you this morning. You should always tell me if you have a problem, said Sir Topham Hatt. You are a loyal, hard-working, and really useful engine. I will send you to the fitter's yard straight away. You'll soon be as good as new. Edward was very relieved, and Thomas was very tired from his extra work, but they both agreed, even when it's hard, it's always best to tell the truth.
It was a beautiful morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas the Tank Engine's blue paint sparkled in the sunshine as he puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. He was feeling very pleased with himself. Hello, Thomas, whistled Percy. You look splendid. Yes, indeed, boasted Thomas. Blue is the only proper colour for an engine. Oh, I don't know. I like my brown paint, said Toby. I've always been green. I wouldn't want to be any other colour either, added Percy. Well, anyway, huffed Thomas, blue is the only colour for a really useful engine. Everyone knows that. Percy said no more. He just grinned at Toby. Later, Thomas was resting when Percy arrived. A large hopper was loading his trucks full of coal. Thomas was still being cheeky. Careful, he warned. Watch out with those silly trucks. Go on, go on, go on, muttered the trucks. And by the way, went on Thomas, those buffers don't look very safe to me. The last load poured down. Help! I'm choking, cried Thomas. Get me out! Percy was worried, but he couldn't help laughing. Thomas's smart blue paint was covered in coal dust from smoke box to bunker. Ha ha, chuckled Percy. You don't look really useful now, Thomas. You look really disgraceful. I'm not disgraceful, choked Thomas. You did that on purpose. Get me out. It took so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't in time for his next train. Toby had to take Annie and Clarabelle. Poor Thomas, whispered Annie to Clarabelle. They were most upset. Thomas was grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it a great joke, but Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking he had made his paint dirty on purpose. Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to the Fat Controller's railway. Next day, Thomas was feeling more cheerful as he watched Percy bring his trucks from the junction. The trucks were heavy and Percy was tired. Have a drink, said his driver, then you'll feel better. The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. Suddenly, Percy found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. Oh, wailed Percy, help! The buffers were broken and Percy was wheel deep in coal. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. Now Percy has learned his lesson too, he chuckled to himself. That night, the two engines made up their quarrel. I didn't cause your accident on purpose, Thomas, whispered Percy. You do know that, don't you? Of course, replied Thomas, and I'm sorry I was cheeky. Your green paint looks splendid again, too. In future, we'll both be more careful of coal.
Missing cars. It was a busy time for the little engines on the island of Sodor. Rheneas had delivered cars of chicken feed. And now he was enjoying the beautiful view as he puffed back to the transfer yards. The narrow gauge controller was waiting for Rheneas. He had one more job for him. I want you to take these cars of slate to Thomas at the wharf, said the narrow gauge controller. Yes, sir, wheezed Rheneas. So Rheneas coupled up to the cars and steamed slowly away. Further up the line, Skarloey was taking on more water. Rheneas was happy to see his friend. Hello, he chuffed cheerfully. But Skarloey wasn't cheerful. I'm tired, groaned Skarloey. I've been working hard all day, and I still have to pick up stone from the quarry. Then I have to collect coal cars from the transfer yards and deliver them to the wharf. Skarloey's water was full, and he puffed sadly away. Rheneas wanted to help his friend. Then an idea flew into his funnel. I'm going to the wharf, he thought. I could deliver Skarloey's coal cars for him. It will be a nice surprise, he puffed, and he raced quickly back to the yards. Rheneas steamed back into the transfer yards. Why are you so excited? Whistled Peter Sam. Can't tell you, cried Rheneas. He didn't want anyone to spoil the surprise for Skarloey. He coupled up to Skarloey's coal cars. Biff, bang, clanked the freight cars. Then Rheneas set off. Soon Rheneas was chuffing up a steep hill. Pump my pistons, he gasped. I can't pull my cars and Skarloey's cars. They're too heavy. So Rheneas chuffed back down the hill. He puffed into a siding. And Skarloey's coal cars were uncoupled. I'll deliver my own cars first, huffed Rheneas. Then I'll come back for Skarloey's. Now it was easy for Rheneas to steam up the steep hill. Thomas was at the wharf. He was waiting for the cars of Slate. Hurry up and uncouple these Slate cars, wheezed Rheneas. You're in a hurry, Rheneas, tooted Thomas. I am, wheezed Rheneas. But I can't tell you why. It's a surprise. As soon as the Slate cars were uncoupled, Rheneas puffed away again. Now he had to collect Skarloey's coal cars. Then there was trouble. When Rheneas arrived at the siding, the cars weren't there. Flatten my funnel, gasped Rheneas. Where have they gone? Rheneas was sure this was where he had left them. I must find Skarloey's cars, he whistled. And Rheneas puffed quickly away. Rheneas searched high and low for the missing coal cars. But they were nowhere to be found. Rheneas was upset. Rheneas stopped at a signal. Skarloey puffed up. He looked very unhappy. My coal cars have disappeared, Skarloey cried. If I don't find them, I will have to go to the depot and tell the narrow gauge controller. Rheneas watched Skarloey puff sadly away. I wanted to surprise Skarloey, Rheneas sighed. But I've only made things worse. Rheneas felt terrible. He didn't want his friend to get into trouble. He knew what he must do. I must tell the other engines about my surprise. Maybe they can help me find the missing cars before Skarloey finds the narrow gauge controller. Rheneas arrived at the transfer yards. Sir Handel, Mighty Mac, and Rusty were there. Please help me, Rheneas whistled. Skarloey's trucks are missing, and it's all my fault. He told them all about his surprise. The other engines were happy to help. If we each look somewhere different, I know we'll find them, he tooted. Just then, Peter Sam puffed in with the missing cars. I found these cars at the bottom of the hill, chuffed Peter Sam. Do you know who left them there? I did, puffed Rheneas excitedly. Thank you, Peter Sam. Peter Sam was puzzled. And so was the narrow gauge controller. You told me the cars were missing, Skarloey, said the narrow gauge controller. He was surprised. Skarloey was surprised too. They were, sir, wheezed Rheneas quickly. It was a surprise. I wanted to help Skarloey, but I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Please, can I still deliver the freight cars for him? Of course you can, laughed the narrow gauge controller. Now we all know what you're going to do. Rheneas smiled. and so did his friend Skarloey. Now he knew about Rheneas' surprise. He could finally take a well-earned rest. Rheneas felt very happy.
Trevor the traction engine is old-fashioned, but he doesn't care. He knows that he is really useful, like his friend Edward, the blue engine. Early one morning, Trevor was chuffing about the vicarage orchard. He had important news for Edward.
The vicar says that not all children are able to have holidays by the sea, so he's having a garden party to raise money for a seaside trip. I'm going to be the star attraction, chatted Trevor, giving rides to all the visitors. The vicar is putting up posters all about it. I'd like to help too, sighed Edward, but without my rails, I wouldn't be much good at a garden party. It was a beautiful day, but Edward was worried. I wish there was something I could do for the party, he said. I'd like to be helpful, like Trevor. Edward's driver laughed. You're helpful in your own way, and that's on the railway. Next day, it was Trevor's turn to look disappointed. He had bad news. The vicar's been so busy that he forgot to put up the posters. Now no one will know about the party.
But Edward had an idea. Don't worry, he said. Everything is going to be all right. Then he explained to his driver. The vicar can paste his posters on my cab and coaches, so wherever I go, they'll go too. Well done, Edward, said his driver. I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt will agree. As indeed he did. Edward steamed happily through the stations collecting his passengers. Look, they said, the vicar is holding a party. We must go to that. Later, Trevor was resting in the orchard shed when Bertie rolled by.
Hello, Trevor. Why are you dozing there like an old stick in the mud? I'm not dozing. I'm resting,
replied Trevor. Then he told Bertie about the vicar's party. I'll be there too, boasted Bertie. I'm not sure people will want to ride on an old traction engine after traveling in a smart red bus like me. The party day arrived. It had rained heavily during the night, and the orchard ground was soaked.
Rain and mud won't spoil my day, said Trevor.
No, indeed, agreed his driver. We'll stay on the road, then we won't get bogged down. Trevor was soon busy trundling up and down the quiet country lane, carrying lots of laughing children. He was just turning a corner when he heard Bertie.
Hello, old-timer. I'm taking everyone to the party. People have come from all over the island.
Trevor gave Bertie a cheerful whistle and turned back toward the orchard. Then there was trouble. Help, I'm stuck, shouted Bertie. His wheels had sunk deep in the orchard mud. Terence the tractor arrived just in time. I'm the one who has to plow fields, laughed Terence. We'd better get you out of here. Using strong ropes, Terence and Trevor pulled Bertie clear of the mud.
This will teach Bertie a thing or two,
Trevor chuffered to himself. At last, Bertie was on the road again. Thank you, Trevor. You're not a stick in the mud at all.
No, smiled Trevor, but you were, just for a little while.
That evening, the vicar arrived to see Edward and his driver.
Thanks to your good idea about the posters, hundreds of people paid to come to the party. We've raised lots of money for the children.
Edward was very pleased, and Trevor fell happily asleep thinking of all the children who would now get to the seaside at last.
Arthur loves working on the island of Sodor. He is new to the railway and is still learning his way around. One morning, he discovered the fishing village. The sun made the water sparkle, and the seagulls called across the harbor. This was Arthur's favorite place. That evening, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds.
There's going to be a new line to the fishing village. I have to decide which engine shall run it.
He paused impressively. Thomas and Percy looked away. They had enough work to do. Arthur hoped he would be chosen.
Thomas, you will work on the new line.
Yes, sir, said Thomas, but he really didn't like the smell of fish. Arthur was disappointed. Sir Topham Hatt sent him to haul coal to the steelworks. That evening, Thomas was at the washdown when Arthur puffed in. "Do I smell a fishy engine?" he teased. "Yes," huffed Thomas. "Silly fish, smelly new line." Arthur wished he could go to the fishing village instead of the steelworks. He'd be much happier than Thomas. The next morning, Thomas was still grumpy. The fishermen had caught lots of fish. "Hurry up," said Thomas. "I'm a busy engine."
And a fussy one, too, said the fisherman. Just enjoy the fresh, salty smell of the fish.
P.U., puffed Thomas. Thomas steamed as fast as he could along the line. But there was trouble ahead. Some faulty points sent his freight cars one way and Thomas onto the old pier rail. Whoa! The troublesome trucks were delighted.
He's falling in the water.
Luckily, Thomas wasn't hurt, and the fish freight car stayed on the tracks. When Sir Topham Hatt heard the news, he checked his timetable.
Arthur is the nearest engine. I'll send him right away.
It was a hot day. The ice that was keeping the fish cold started to melt. "I hope someone comes quickly," moaned Thomas. "That fish will spoil soon." Arthur was surprised to see Thomas in the tidal pool. "Are you all right, Thomas?" "No, but I'll be much better when you take these fish away." "The breakdown van will be here soon," called Arthur's driver. Arthur knew he had to hurry. He raced along the line to the docks and arrived there just in time. Later, Arthur went to see Thomas at the fitter's yard. "Thank you for helping me," said Thomas. "Thank you," said Arthur. "I wish I had the fishing village line all the time." "Well, please tell Sir Topham Hatt, because I don't like fish." That evening, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds.
I need an engine to go to the fishing village while Thomas is being repaired, he said. Any volunteers?
"Me," Arthur blurted out. "And please, sir, may I run on that line all the time? Thomas doesn't like fish, but I do."
"Then the line is yours," said Sir Topham Hatt.
Arthur was delighted. The next morning, he puffed into the fishing village right on time. The smell of fish was everywhere, but he was sure he had the most beautiful line on the island of Sodor.
Trevor the traction engine enjoyed living in the vicarage orchard. Edward came to see him every day, but sometimes Trevor didn't have enough work to do. I do like to keep busy all the time, he sighed one day, and I do like company, especially children's company. Cheer up, smiled Edward. Sir Topham Hatt has work for you at his new harbor. I'm to take you to meet Thomas today. Oh, exclaimed Trevor happily. A harbor, the seaside, children, that will be lovely. Thomas was on his way to the harbor with a trainload of metal pilings. They were needed to make the harbor wall firm and safe. "Hello, Thomas," said Edward. "This is Trevor, a friend of mine. He's a traction engine." Thomas eyed the newcomer doubtfully. "A what engine?" "A traction engine," explained Trevor. "I run on roads instead of rails. Can you take me to the harbor, please? Sir Topham Hatt has a job for me." "Yes, of course," replied Thomas, but he was still puzzled. Workmen coupled Trevor's car to Thomas's train, and soon they were ready to start their journey. "I'm glad Sir Topham Hatt needs me," called Trevor. "I don't have enough to do sometimes, you know, although I can work anywhere, in orchards, on farms, in scrapyards, even at harbors." "But you don't run on rails," puffed Thomas. "I'm a traction engine. I don't need rails to be useful," replied Trevor. "You wait and see." When they reached the harbor, they found everything in confusion. Cars had been derailed, blocking the line, and stone slabs lay everywhere. "We must get these pilings past," said Thomas's driver. "They are essential. Trevor, we need you to drag them round this mess." "Just the sort of job I like," replied Trevor. "Now you'll see, Thomas. I'll soon show you what traction engines can do." Trevor was as good as his word. He dragged the pilings clear with chains and towed them into position. "Who needs rails?" he muttered cheerfully to himself. Later, Thomas brought Annie and Clarabelle to visit him. Thomas was most impressed. "Now I understand how useful a traction engine can be." The coaches were full of children. Trevor gave them rides along the harbor. He liked this best of all. "He's very kind," said Annie. "He reminds me of Thomas," added Clarabelle. Everyone was sorry when it was time for Trevor to go. Thomas pulled him to the junction. A small tear came into Trevor's eye. Thomas pretended not to see. He whistled gaily to make Trevor happy. "I'll come and see you if I can," he promised. "The vicar will look after you, and there's plenty of work for you now at the orchard, but we may need you again at the harbor someday." "That would be wonderful," said Trevor. That evening, Trevor stood remembering his new friend Thomas, the harbor, and most of all, the children. Then he went happily to sleep in the shed at the bottom of the orchard.
It was a sunny day on the island of Sodor, and all the engines were working hard. Gordon was feeling very excited. "Morning, Thomas. I look my best, and you know why?" "Why?" "Because a Duke and Duchess are visiting, the Fat Controller will be choosing me as their special engine." "Pah!" puffed Thomas. After Gordon had been washed and polished, he rushed away to meet the visitors. But a signal diverted Gordon into a siding. He was very upset. "I'm going to be late," he muttered. A huge engine rocketed by. Steaming pistons! Who's that? Gordon soon found out. When he arrived at the shed, the huge engine was humming quietly. "Who are you?" "This is Spencer. He's the fastest engine in the world." Huh. But secretly, Gordon was impressed. I'm the Duke and Duchess's private engine. I take them everywhere. Quiet. There will be a party for our guests at Maron Station. That's far away over Gordon's Hill. You'll need to take on plenty of water, muttered Gordon. I have plenty of water, wheezed Spencer. And he raced away. I was only trying to be useful, grunted Gordon. Spencer showed the Duke and Duchess many beautiful places. But he never stopped once to take on more water. Gordon and Thomas were collecting passengers when Spencer raced through on his way to the party. Don't forget the water! Who cares? He'll be in trouble soon, sighed Thomas. And Spencer was. He ran out of water on Gordon's Hill. Why didn't I listen? Sighed Spencer. The Fat Controller soon heard the news. I'll send Gordon. When Gordon arrived, the station master was waiting. You need to rescue Spencer. He's stuck on the hill. Hurry, Gordon, said his driver. Gordon was looking forward to seeing Spencer. Run out of water? He teased. Yes, snapped Spencer. I must have a leaky tank. Perhaps, smiled Gordon. But we'd better hurry. Everyone is waiting. Gordon switched to Spencer's line and was coupled up. Then they set off. See, said Gordon, we're right on time. Spencer was embarrassed. What do you think of Spencer now? Whispered Thomas. Too much puff and not enough steam. Well done, said the Fat Controller. You're the fastest engine on Sodor. I know that, muttered Gordon.
At harvest time, the air is filled with the smell of fresh fruit and vegetables. The engines happily deliver their loads to market. But one day, mist and rain swirled down Toby's line. Percy was delivering a load of fresh tomatoes. Suddenly, he felt a big bump. Bust my buffers, Percy cried. What was that? The guard put out the warning flags, while Percy's driver inspected the tracks. The earth's crumbling, he said. We must tell Sir Topham Hatt, decided Percy. Percy puffed back as fast as he could. I've got important news! The tracks on Toby's line are wobbly. Huffed Gordon. Old and wobbly, just like Toby. That's not news. Can't stop to listen to your silly chatter. Gordon never listens to me, muttered Percy. Next, he spoke to Sir Topham Hatt. Sir! Sir! Not now, Percy. Thomas, you are to collect the prize bull. He's at the farm on Toby's line. Yes, sir. But those tracks are wobbly, cried Percy. They are safe enough, said Sir Topham Hatt. Bye, Percy. Nobody ever listens to me. Thomas was carefully chuffing through the rain. Soon he had collected the farmer's bull and was on his way back. The rain had made the tracks more wobbly than ever. Suddenly there was a deep rumbling sound. Thomas's driver applied the brakes, but it was too late. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas. "We're stuck!" And they were. Late that night, Thomas still hadn't returned. Percy was worried. "Thomas is in trouble," he said. Gordon and James took no notice. "Worry wheels," huffed Gordon. "Fussy funnel," said James. "Please," Percy asked his driver, "can we find Thomas?" "Right away," said his driver. Percy was nervous, but his lamp shone brightly in the dark. The tracks creaked and wobbled, but Percy pressed on. "Percy!" cried Thomas. Thomas was very happy to see his friend. "I'll have you out of there in no time," said Percy. Percy puffed and pulled and pulled and puffed. And finally, Thomas and his driver were free. "Oh, thank you," said Thomas. "I'm glad to be useful," smiled Percy. It was dawn before the track was cleared. Then Percy and Thomas made their way back home. "Thomas is here," whistled Percy. "Percy saved the day," said Thomas.
Agreed the bull. "I'm sorry, Percy," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We must do a better job of listening to you in the future."
Percy was pleased.
Henry C. Red. Henry found life boring at the works. The men worked hard to make him better, but it seemed ages before he was ready. At last, however, when he had passed the test to make sure he was mended properly, men came to repaint him. But Henry saw that instead of nice green paint, they had something very different in their paint pots. "That's not right," protested Henry. "The Fat Controller wants me to be green with red stripes, not red all over like tomato sauce." The painters laughed. "You'd look very handsome, Henry," they said, "but don't worry, this paint is a special sort of undercoat. You shall have proper green with red stripes before we've finished." "Undercoat," muttered Henry in disgust. "Whatever would the other engines say if they saw me looking like this?" The men laughed and carried on painting. Early next morning his driver came. "Wake up, Henry," he said. "There's an emergency at the big station, and the Fat Controller says you're to help." "But I can't go like this," exclaimed Henry. "They'd all laugh like anything." "No choice," said his driver. "The diesel pulling the express has failed, and the Fat Controller needs you to take over. It's either us or a long walk for the passengers, and you know the Fat Controller wouldn't like that." The fireman raised steam as quickly as he could, and Henry, blushing with embarrassment, set off for the big station. The Fat Controller was pleased to see him. "I feel so silly looking like this," complained Henry. The Fat Controller laughed. "You do look unusual, Henry," he agreed, "but you have helped me out of a very awkward situation, so don't worry about it." But Henry did worry. Soon, too soon for Henry, it was time to start. The express was heavy, and Henry felt the drag of the coaches. "We'll need help on Gordon's Hill today," remarked his driver. But they were in trouble earlier than that. As they approached Edward Station, the brakes went wrong on the last coach of the train, and they had to stop and uncouple it. To make matters worse, Donald, who should have been there to help, had been called away. Henry had to push the coach into a siding himself, and, without Donald, there was no one to help him on the hill. "Never mind," comforted his driver. "You can do it. You're an enterprising engine, remember?" Henry snorted. He didn't feel very enterprising just then. The men at the works had mended Henry well. His driver gave him as good a start as he could. It was hard going, but now Henry felt fired with determination. "Let them laugh at my red paint," he snorted. "I'll show them." Slowly he struggled upwards. "I can do it! I can do it! I can do it!" he panted. "Oh dear, will the top never come?" Then, suddenly, there it was. "I've done it! I've done it! I've done it!" he puffed proudly. After that, it was much easier, and they reached the other railway quickly. The fat controller, who had been on the train, came to congratulate Henry. "Well done, Henry," he said. "I'm very proud of you. Perhaps all my engines should be painted red, but you have certainly earned your proper green with red stripes." Which, of course, is just what Henry got. And when he at last returned to the shed, there was a warm welcome for Henry the Green Engine.
Molly's Special. It was a blustery day on the island of Sodor. Thomas was excited. He was on his way to meet a new engine called Molly. She was waiting as he pulled into the yards. Molly was bright yellow. She had great big wheels and a shiny funnel. She looked very smart. "Hello," Thomas puffed cheerfully. "Hello," Molly chuffed back. Molly looked sad. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "Emily laughed at me because I have to take empty freight cars to the coaling plant," Molly puffed sadly. "I want to take full freight cars like a really useful engine." This made Thomas feel sad. "How can I help Molly feel important?" he thought to himself. Then he saw some tarps flapping in the wind. This gave Thomas an idea. "I know what we can do," puffed Thomas. Molly reversed the empty freight cars into a siding. Thomas asked Molly's driver to cover her freight cars with the tarps. "With your cars covered up, no one will know they are empty," puffed Thomas. "We can make everyone think you're carrying a special delivery." "Then I will feel important," Molly chuffed cheerfully. Later, when Thomas saw Emily at the station, he told her all about Molly's special. "What is it?" asked Emily. "Not telling," Thomas puffed. "But it's the most special of all." And every time Thomas saw another engine, he told them all about Molly's special. Soon all the engines were talking about Molly's special. They were excited, except Gordon. "It won't be as important as my Express," Gordon huffed. "Molly's special is much more important than the Express," puffed Thomas. "And you'll see it tonight at Abbey Station." But then Thomas was worried. How can I make Molly's freight cars look even more special than Gordon's Express, he wondered. Later that evening, Thomas saw a station master lighting lanterns. This gave him another idea. "Can I borrow your lanterns?" Thomas puffed to the station master. "Of course," the station master replied. Soon, Thomas's trucks were filled with the lanterns, and he puffed away to find Molly. Soon, Molly's freight cars were decorated with the beautiful lanterns. She was taking the cars to the coaling plant for a very important job. "Your freight cars look very special now," puffed Thomas. "You must go through Abbey Station. Lots of engines will be there to see you." The lanterns on Molly's freight cars twinkled like stars in the night. Thomas and Molly arrived at Abbey Station, Emily, Percy, and Gordon were waiting. Percy gasped. "Ooh! She looks magnificent," exclaimed Emily. And for the first time since she'd been on Sodor, Molly felt special, but not for long. A strong gust of wind blew one of the tarps into the air. "Oh no!" gasped Thomas. Now everyone could see there was nothing inside.
Those freight cars are empty, Gordon huffed. I knew it couldn't be as important as the express.
"So there isn't a special?" Percy puffed sadly. Molly felt silly and not very important at all, so she puffed away as fast as she could. Thomas felt very bad. Just then, Sir Topham Hatt called the station master. And the station master came to see Thomas. "There are lots of engines waiting at the coaling plant," the station master said. "They're waiting for Molly's freight cars." "Oh no," moaned Thomas. "I've got to find Molly quickly." Molly had stopped in a siding. She looked very sad. "I'm sorry I made you look silly," puffed Thomas, "but they are waiting for your empty freight cars at the coaling plant." "But I've nearly run out of coal," moaned Molly. "Don't worry," puffed Thomas. "I can help you get there." So Thomas pushed and Molly pulled. Thomas and Molly worked together. And they arrived at the coaling plant in no time at all. There were lots of engines waiting for them. They all needed the empty freight cars to start their nighttime deliveries. "Your empty freight cars were important after all," puffed Thomas. Molly felt so proud it made her axles tingle. "We need even more freight cars," chuffed Henry. "I'll get them," Molly chuffed cheerfully. "And I'll help," puffed Thomas. Molly filled up with more coal, then Molly and Thomas raced back to the yard. They collected some more empty freight cars, and they puffed quickly away. Gordon was stopped at a junction. His signal had turned to red. "Out of the way," puffed Molly. "Empty freight cars coming through?" "You see," laughed Thomas. "Sometimes empty freight cars are more important than your express." Gordon's face went as red as the signal. And Molly felt more special than special.
Sir Topham Hatt's engines are proud of how useful they are. It makes them feel important, but none of them feels more important than Gordon. "Watch out," Gordon wheezed. "You'll get my paint all sooty." "Pulling freight cars is a sooty job," teased Salty, "but then you wouldn't know." "Of course not," Gordon huffed importantly. "Express engines don't pull freight cars. It wouldn't be dignified." "Dingy-fried?" puzzled Percy. "What's that?" "Dignified," Gordon corrected. It means that someone's too big for his buffers," teased Salty. "Pah," said Gordon, and he puffed away. That evening, fog covered the island of Sodor. Everything slowed down, and soon the docks were packed with waiting freight cars. This caused confusion and delay. Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds. He was in a great hurry. "Henry, Thomas, and Percy," he said, "you must go to the docks immediately." "Yes, sir," they whistled. Then Sir Topham Hatt turned to the big blue engine. "You too, Gordon," he said. "I need a big engine to take the freight cars where they won't be in the way." "Freight cars?" huffed Gordon. He could not believe what he had heard. Gordon wasn't happy to be pulling freight cars. He waited impatiently while they were shunted into place. Hurry up, chuffed Gordon crossly. Why the rush, Gordon? Asked Thomas. If I must pull freight cars, then I'll show Salty how an express engine pulls freight cars, Gordon huffed. Careful, Captain, Salty tooted. You don't want to get too big for your buffers. But Gordon ignored Salty. The next morning, Gordon raced along with his heavy load. Now this is how you pull freight cars, he puffed. But the signalman had accidentally left the points switched to the branch line. Gordon rattled through the junction. That's strange. I'm on the branch line. Oh no, the signalman cried. Express trains aren't supposed to go that way. It was too late. Gordon had already raced into the distance. The old branch line was weak and rusty. There were signs warning all the trains to go slow. But Gordon ignored the signs. I'm an express engine. I don't go slow, he said. And he went even faster. The branch line couldn't take his weight, and the rails buckled. Oh, help! Gordon cried as he slid off the tracks and into a field. No one was hurt, but poor Gordon felt very undignified. What will Sir Topham Hatt say? He groaned. He found out soon enough. Well, Gordon, said Sir Topham Hatt, you wanted to show Salty a thing or two, and you've certainly done that. You've shown him how silly it is to ignore go-slow signs. Sorry, sir, said Gordon, and he let out a sad wheesh of steam. Gordon was soon repaired and back at the docks ready for work, but he was very unhappy with himself. Everyone makes mistakes, said Thomas. Even you. Salty's sorry he teased you, puffed James. And I'm sorry I was too big for my buffers, chuffed Gordon. And all the engines gave a jolly toot. Even Gordon.
One day, Edward was talking to Trevor when Douglas steamed by. He was pulling a train of heavy coal cars. Come on, Edward. Stop gossiping in the sun when there's work to be done. Later, Edward spoke to Douglas. Trevor and I are old friends, and you and he have a lot in common, too. We do? Quizzed Douglas. And what would that be? Scrap, said Edward quietly. Douglas gasped. Don't mention that word. It makes me wheels wobble. It does the same to Trevor, replied Edward. He was being sent to the scrapyard, but the vicar and I saved him, and now he's really useful again. Even so, Sir Topham Hatt certainly does need another steam engine here. Aye, he does, and quickly. That night, Douglas was still working. He had taken the midnight goods train to a station at a faraway part of the island where only the diesels work. He was just shunting, ready for his return journey, when... That sounds like a steam engine, he thought. The hiss came again. Who's there? Asked Douglas. A whisper came. Are you Sir Topham Hatt's engine? Aye, I'm proud of it. Well, I'm Oliver, and I'm with my brake van Toad. We've run out of coal and have no more steam. But what are you doing? Escaping. From what? Scrap. Douglas shivered. Then he remembered Edward's story about saving Trevor. I'll be glad to help you. It'll have to look, though, as if you're ready for scrap and I'm taking you away. Their drivers and firemen agreed to help, too. Everyone worked fast.
No time to turn round. I'll run tender first. Come on. But before they could clear the station, they were stopped. Aha! Called a foreman. A Great Western engine and a brake van, too. You can't take these. Aye, but they're all for us, said Douglas's driver. See for yourself. The foreman looked all over Oliver. Seems in order. Right away, guard. That was a near thing. We've had worse, replied Oliver, and they forged ahead. It was daylight when their journey ended. We're home, cried Douglas. Shh, said his driver. There are the works. We'll find a place for Oliver. Oliver said goodbye and thank you, and Douglas puffed away. The next day, Douglas told the other engines all about Oliver. Sir Topham Hatt will have to know, said James. Douglas should tell him at once, added Gordon. Well, here he is, said a voice. Now, what's this all about? Beg pardon, sir, but we do need another engine. Yes, sir, ventured Gordon. A steam engine, sir. Well, unless one is saved from scrap, there's little hope. But, sir, one has. Yes, indeed. And thanks to you, Douglas, he is now at our works. Oliver is just what we need for Duck's branch line. Everyone cheered. Now Oliver and Toad are mended and painted in full Great Western colors. Duck and Oliver are happy on their branch line. The others laughed at first and called it the Little Western. Duck and Oliver were delighted, and so the Little Western it will always be.
The island of Sodor is proud to be part of the United Kingdom. Because of this, they are ruled by none other than Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. However, there is also the governor of Sodor, who's in charge of the government on the island. He travels around with his private engine, Croven, who is named after a very powerful king of Sodor who prevented a Viking invasion. The governor rides in a special coach called Helen. Helen is very kind and friendly. However, Croven is not. He is perhaps one of the most arrogant engines on the island of Sodor. One day, he came into Knapford, boasting like usual.
Good morning, engines! Aren't I such a fabulous sight? God, not you! It is me! Aren't I a sight?
Yes! What a disturbing one!
Quiet, you wooden old cow! Good grief!
One day, Croven shunted Helen into the yard to get cleaned up. He left her there and pulled off to get to the washdown. Just as he left, Oliver came in with Toad. They went into the siding next to Helen to rest.
Oh, hello there!
Oh my goodness. It's the governor of Sodor's private coach.
Pleased to meet you, ma'am.
Oh, just call me Helen.
I'm Oliver, and this is my brake van, Toad.
Oliver, Toad, and Helen all had a pleasant conversation as Helen was being cleaned up. Eventually, after the workman finished with her, Croven puffed in to collect her. He was very rude to Oliver and Toad.
What are you doing here, Mr. Great Western? Go! Get yourself in that filthy brake van away from the governor's private coach.
Don't you dare speak to them like that! They're very kind! Kinder than you!
Ha! But they're not as important as us. Come along, Helen. The governor is waiting.
Oh, I'd like to have the governor ride to me.
Croven burst out laughing. You! An express coach would be indignified for the governor, let alone you! You are a dirty, rotten, smelly, pathetic brake van!
How dare you insult my brake van?
Insult? I'm pointing out a fact. A brake van is the only rank above trucks, the lowest status on the railway. What makes you think the man in charge of the whole island would want to be transported in a filthy old tool shed on wheels? Come along, Helen. Helen was too shocked to say anything. Croven puffed out of the station, still laughing.
Don't listen to him, Toad. No engine can get more nasty than him.
Oliver puffed away, feeling very cross. Toad, on the other hand, felt very bad. He was sad for the rest of the day. That evening, Oliver and Duck tried to cheer him up.
He's full of hot air. No one likes him. He's a disgrace. You're a very useful brake van, Toad. Don't listen to him.
But Toad was still sad.
It's not bad. It's just I feel like need a change. I wish I could just have a nice surprise one day. One that doesn't run away from my train. Life is just so boring or frightening for a brake van. Croven was somewhat right.
Well, I don't think he's right at all. I'm sure Friendly Surprise will show up soon.
Exactly. Now, I'm taking some important visitors in Old Slow Coach this evening for an evening stroll. Would you like to come along?
Oh, yes, please.
Toad liked rolling along the coast at night. The fresh, salty air took his mind off of what Croven had said about him. When they arrived at Arlesborough, Toad felt very satisfied. The important visitors turned out to be associates of the governor and were surveying the small railway. The small controller was to be knighted by the Queen, and there was going to be a festival to celebrate this before he left England. The governor was to attend and make a speech congratulating the small controller's efforts to railway preservation.
My, this will be quite an occasion.
Yes, it will be! I just wish I was the one taking the governor here, or passengers at least.
The governor only rides with that nasty engine, unfortunately.
Cheer up, Toad. I'll take you to the ceremony tomorrow, and you can, at least, watch the governor give his speech.
Well, I guess that's the least I could do.
The next day, Oliver, Duck, and Toad were all waiting to head towards Arlesborough. They had to wait till the governor's train had left.
All right. When Croven comes, I suggest we all stay back. He's bound to throw some insults at us.
Duck's coaches were already in the platform, but Duck was in a siding so he wouldn't have any negative contact with Croven.
Oh dear, here comes trouble. If he says anything, just ignore him.
Croven didn't say anything. He was in a bad mood. He snorted into the station with Helen. Cameras flashed everywhere and the governor waved out of the window. "Why can't you come quietly, you wretched cooch?"
You kept blowing steam at me! I could hardly breathe!
Croven, this platform is for the passengers. We need to get into the siding over there. Croven was enraged. The siding? The siding is for dirty trucks! Croven was very cross. He snorted over to the points and yelled profanities. Everyone was shocked. Then Croven made a huge mistake. You want to be in the siding? So be it! Ouch! No one was hurt, but the governor of Sodor was enraged. You stuck-up, blithering idiot! I've had it with you and your childish arrogance. I'll need another form of transport, which means I'll be late. He looked around the yard, and then his eyes were fixed on Toad. Toad was very nervous, but the governor was smiling and came up to him.
Why, it's a Toad brake van! My dad was a guard who worked in one of these. He used to always let me ride in it. Oh, it brings back so many memories from my wonderful childhood. We can get you another coach and engine, sir.
The governor thought for a minute, then said something that shocked everyone.
You know what? No, I'll take a simpler way to travel. Mr. Brightvan and your Great Western engine, would you mind giving me a lift to Arlesborough?
Toad couldn't believe what he was hearing. Neither could Croven.
Right away, sir. Up on board.
What? Sir, I must decline this ridiculous idea.
I am the governor,
and I have made my mind. Ha! And with that, Oliver and Toad set off. The governor had a wonderful time. He was so excited that he kept pulling the brake lever on and off, which made the journey very difficult for Oliver. Toad, on the other hand, told the governor all about his escape from the scrapyard with Oliver and Douglas. The governor was fascinated and listened with his eyes wider than a child.
Me father said Rolling Stock always had the greatest stories.
Toad laughed as they puffed into Arlesborough. It was flooded with people. They were all shocked to see the governor of Sodor, the most important man on the island, riding in a shabby wooden brake van. Cameras flashed like mad, and when Oliver stopped, the police had to shoo everyone away from Toad.
This'll be front page on the newspaper. He'll be the luckiest brake van ever.
Sir, might I ask why you aren't with your private train?
Oh, to heck with private luxurious trains. A brake van is the way for a politician to travel.
After he had walked off, the news reporters started interviewing Toad. Toad was so overwhelmed that he didn't know which questions to answer first. When he and Oliver returned to Tidmouth, the governor thanked them, especially Toad.
You brought back my childhood memories. I thought I would never be able to ride in a brake van like my father's ever again. We'll definitely have to do this again.
I'm sure the Fat Controller could make some arrangements.
The governor then spoke severely to Croven.
If it happens again, then I know that a light blue sewage tank will be installed at the docks. In other words, quit the insults and arrogance, or you'll be stirring some nasty stuff in your boiler.
After hearing a statement like that, I think Croven will, don't you? That night, Toad felt happier than he had ever felt in his life. He talked endlessly about his experience.
What did you think of all the fame you retrieved?
Toad laughed.
I enjoyed it very much, although it was a bit overwhelming with all those people crowding around me. Although I had a wonderful time, I think I'll just stick to being a happy break friend for now.
Didn't I tell you Friendly Surprise would show up soon?
Toad could only chuckle and went happily to sleep. He was a very happy brake van.
Percy and Toby were worried. Thomas's recent accident had caused a great deal of trouble, and Sir Topham Hatt was waiting for them with important news. Here is Daisy, the diesel rail car, who has come to help while Thomas is indisposed. Please, sir, will she go when Thomas comes back, sir? That depends, said Sir Topham Hatt. Meanwhile, however long she stays, I hope you will both make her welcome and comfortable. Yes, sir, we'll try, sir, said the engines. Good. Run along now and show her the shed. She will want a rest after her journey. Daisy was not easy to please. She shuddered at the engine shed. This is dreadfully smelly. I'm highly sprung, and anything smelly is bad for my swerves. Next, they tried the carriage shed. This is better, said Daisy, but whatever is that rubbish? The rubbish turned out to be Annie, Clarabelle, and Henrietta, who were most offended. We won't stay here to be insulted, they fumed. Percy and Toby had to take them away and spend half the night soothing their hurt feelings. The engines woke next morning feeling exhausted. Daisy, on the other hand, felt bright and cheerful. Woo, 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 she tooted as she came out of the yard and back to the station. Look at me, she purred to the passengers. I'm the latest diesel, highly sprung and right up to date. You won't want Thomas's bumpy old Annie and Clarabelle now. The passengers waited for Daisy to start, but she didn't. She saw that a milk van was about to be coupled to her and was most indignant. Do they expect me to pull that? Surely, said her driver, you can pull one van. I won't, said Daisy. Percy can do it. He loves messing about with freight cars. She began to shudder violently. Nonsense, said her driver. Come on now, back down. Daisy lurched backwards. She was so cross that she blew a fuse. Told you, she said, and stopped. Everyone argued with her, but it was no use. It's Fitter's orders, she said. What is? My fitter's a very nice man. He comes every week and examines me carefully. Daisy, he says, never, never pull. You're highly sprung, and pulling is bad for your swerves. So that's how it is, finished Daisy. Stuff and nonsense, said the station master. I can't understand, said the shunter. Whatever made Sir Topham Hatt send us such a feeble... Feeble, spluttered Daisy. Let me... Stop arguing, grumbled the passengers. We're late already. So they uncoupled the van, and Daisy purred away, feeling very pleased with herself. She could now enjoy her journey. That's a good story, she chuckled. I'll do just what work I choose and no more. But she said it to herself. Daisy, the diesel railcar's work in the countryside, was full of surprises. But she was frightened of bulls and cows, and she remained very lazy and stubborn. One day, Toby brought Henrietta to the station where Percy was grumpily shunting. Hello, Percy. I see Daisy's left the milk behind again. I'll have to make a special journey with it, I suppose. Anyone would think I'd nothing to do, grumbled Percy. Tell you what, replied Toby, I'll take the milk, you fetch my freight cars. The drivers and station master agreed. Percy had never been to the quarry before. He began ordering the freight cars about. Hurry along, he said. The freight cars grumbled to each other. This is Toby's place. Percy's got no right to poke his funnel up here and push us around. They whispered and passed the word. Pay Percy back. Pay Percy back. Come along, puffed Percy. No nonsense. We'll give him nonsense, giggled the freight cars. But they followed so quietly that Percy thought they were under control. Suddenly, they saw a notice ahead. All trains stopped to pin down brakes. Beep, beep! Brakes, conductor, please! But before he could check them, the freight cars surged ahead. On, they cried. Help, help, whistled Percy. The man on duty at the crossing rushed to warn traffic with his red flag, but was too late to switch Percy to the runaway siding. Frantically trying to grip the rails, Percy slid into the yard. Beep, beep! Look out! The brake van was in smithereens. Percy's driver and fireman had jumped clear, but Percy was stranded. Next day, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. Toby and Daisy had helped to clear the wreckage, but Percy remained on his perch of freight cars. We must now try, said Sir Topham Hatt, to run the branch line with Toby and a diesel. You have put us in an awkward predicament, Percy. I am sorry, sir. You must stay there till we are ready, continued Sir Topham Hatt. And you really must be more careful with freight cars. Percy sighed. The freight cars groaned beneath his wheels. He quite understood about awkward predicaments. Sir Topham Hatt spoke severely to Daisy, too. My engines work hard. I send lazy engines away. Daisy was ashamed. However, Toby says you worked hard after Percy's accident. So you shall have another chance. Thank you, sir, said Daisy. I will work hard. Toby says he'll help me. Excellent. What Toby doesn't know about branch line problems isn't worth knowing. Our Toby's an experienced engine. Next day, Thomas came back. And Percy was sent to be mended. Annie and Clarabelle were delighted to see Thomas again, and he took them for a run at once. All are now friends, and Toby has taught Daisy a great deal. She shooed a cow off the line the other day all by herself. That shows you, doesn't it? Thomas and Percy are good friends, but sometimes Percy teases Thomas about being frightened, and he doesn't like that at all. One evening, he was dozing happily, but Percy wanted to talk. Wake up, Thomas. Are you dreaming about the time you thought I was a ghost? Certainly not. Anyway, I was only pretending to be scared. I knew it was you, really. Percy went on teasing him. I hope the guard leaves the light on for you tonight. Why? Asked Thomas. I quite like the dark. Oh, really? Exclaimed Percy. I am surprised. I always thought you were afraid of the dark. I wonder why. Thomas decided to say nothing and went to sleep instead. Next day, Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. I would like you to go to the harbor tonight. You have to collect something rather unusual. What sort of something? Asked Thomas. Wait and see, replied Sir Topham Hatt. Meanwhile, Percy was moving freight cars into a siding. Henry arrived with his goods train. The signalman changed the switches, and Percy waited on the siding until Henry had steamed by. Then there was trouble. The switches are jammed, called the signalman. I can't switch them back for Percy. The workmen will have to mend them in the morning. It's too late now. Said Percy's driver. I'm sorry, Percy, but you'll have to stay here for the night. Where are you going? Asked Percy. Home for tea, replied the fireman. Percy was speechless. He watched as the other engines went home to the shed. Nighttime came, and Percy began to feel very lonely. Oh, dear, he murmured. It's very dark. Oh, what's that? It was only an owl, but Percy didn't realize this. Oh, I wish Thomas were here too, he sighed. Thomas was waiting for his mysterious load at the harbor. Suddenly, there it was. "Cinders and ashes," cried Thomas. "It's a dragon." "Don't worry," laughed his driver. "This dragon is made of paper. It's for the carnival tomorrow." Workmen lifted the dragon onto Thomas's low loader and put lights all round it for protection. Then Thomas set off into the misty night. Percy was asleep on his siding and had no idea that Thomas was approaching him. Percy woke up with a start. "Help!" cried Percy. "I'm not going to open my eyes until my driver comes." Next morning, the switches were mended and Percy puffed back to the junction. Gordon was just about to leave with the express. "You'll never guess what I saw last night." Gordon was in no mood for puzzles. "I'm a busy engine. I don't have time for your games. I've seen a huge dragon. It was covered in lights." Gordon snorted. "You've been in the sun too long. Your dome has cracked." When the other engines heard the news, they laughed too. "Look out, Percy," chuckled James, "or the dragon may gobble you up." "No one believes me," huffed Percy. "Maybe I did imagine the dragon after all." But Percy soon found out that he hadn't. "Help! Save me!" cried Percy. "It's all right," whistled Thomas, and he explained about the carnival. "By the way, how was your night out?" Percy decided to tell Thomas the truth. "Well, Percy," said Thomas, "maybe we do get scared sometimes, but if we're not afraid to tell each other, then that means we're quite brave, too."
Bill and Ben, the tank engine twins, work in the clay mines and quarries near Brendam Docks. Their work is important, but it can be hot and dirty. Sometimes this makes the twins naughty. One morning they were feeling very naughty indeed. "That's my line of cars," huffed Bill. "It's not. It's mine," snorted Ben. "Yours is over there. It's mine. It's not. It's mine. It's not." Their friend Boko was worried. "Stop quarreling, you two, or the only thing you'll have left to share is trouble." "Silly," snapped Bill. "Silly yourself," grumbled Ben. "Bill and Ben, behave yourselves," said Sir Topham Hatt. "It's clear to me that we need another diesel to help out. There is only one available. He's new and keen to make an impression." "If I were you," whispered Boko, "I'd get back to work right away." Meanwhile, Sir Topham Hatt was having doubts about his own decision. "I hope the new diesel doesn't cause even more confusion. He's bound to have teething troubles." And he was right. "Oh, my grease and oil. I wasn't expecting this hill." "Oh, what's that?" Boko came to the rescue. "Sorry," said the diesel. "I'm all hot and bothered. I've got teething troubles, you know." The news soon spread. "Apparently it's teething troubles," confided Thomas to Percy. "Hey, you two. This new diesel's got a toothache. Good luck." "Why does Percy want to wish us good luck?" asked Bill. "Because he knows we'll need it. A diesel with a toothache must be the worst diesel of all." Then their manager spoke to them. "You will take your loads to the docks and rest there tonight. There's a lot of hard work to do tomorrow." It was dark when the twins reached the docks. They left the freight cars by the quay and scurried off to the shed. "You do look glum," sighed Duck. "It's the new diesel's fault," replied Bill. "He's got a toothache." "He hasn't got a toothache. He's got teething troubles." That means he's new and this causes some problems. In his case, it's his cooling system. Next morning, the twins heard an unfamiliar whistle. Oh no! It's the new diesel! And it was. Hello. I'll soon sort this train out. You take the front and I'll push from behind. What fun! All went well as they set off. Then they came to a hill. Come on! Come on! Push harder, you silly diesel! Shouted Ben. But the diesel couldn't push any harder. I'm overheating again. Oh, Pa! Snorted Bill. You know what? Sighed the driver. Let's try and finish the journey anyway. It means we'll have to pull the diesel as well. Can you do it, twins? We'll try! And sure enough, they could. That night, Sir Topham Hatt came to see them. Well done, Bill and Ben. I've sent the new diesel back to the works. Can you manage alone? Oh, yes, sir. Boko, whispered Bill. I'm sorry we were rude to you. And, added Ben, the new diesel was really quite friendly. And you know what friends do? Murmured Duck. No, what? They always say goodnight to each other. And so they did. But they still chatted about the diesel and his teething troubles all night long.
Stepney, the Bluebell engine, works closely with his friend Rusty. One day, the Fat Controller came to see him. Rusty tells me you're in need of change, so I want you to help Toby and Mavis in the quarry. Oh, thank you, sir, said Stepney. Shall I be away long? Just today, replied the Fat Controller. But please be careful, it's easy to get lost up there, so be back before dark. We will, said the driver. Stepney soon arrived at the quarry. We're glad you're here to help us, said Toby. Are those my trucks? Asked Stepney eagerly. Only some of them. There's masses more in the sidings, replied Mavis. The more the merrier, whistled Stepney. Stepney was really enjoying himself. The dustier he became, the harder he worked. Mavis and Toby were impressed. The quarry foreman spoke to his driver. We have a night special to take to the building site at the new branch line. Do you want to pull the train? Yes, please, said the driver. But he should have asked the Fat Controller first. Night came. Be careful, Stepney, advised Toby. I will, and thank you for a lovely day. I do hope I can come back again. The line can be spooky, said Mavis. Thank you for the warning. And with that, Stepney puffed away into the night. Stepney arrived on time and made the delivery of rock and stones for the workmen. Then he set off for home. That's when the trouble began. The fog came down. Mavis was right. Suddenly everything does look spooky. There's a signal box. And the signal light is green. Someone must have been expecting us. But they hadn't. The points had been set in the wrong direction, but Stepney didn't realize this. Home, here we come, he thought. Then they approached an unknown area. The driver made a decision. It's best if we rest here until the fog clears. What are those strange sounds, wondered Stepney. Then the fog slowly lifted. Oh no, wailed Stepney. We're in the scrapyards. His driver and fireman went for help. Stepney was all alone, but not for long. 2 diesels approached. Got you this time, Stepney. You'll make very fine scrap indeed. Buffer him, Bert. The diesels took him to the large smelter's shed. Bye-bye, Stepney, said the diesel. Stepney looked up. Above him was a huge grabber. "This engine's not for scrapping," shouted Stepney. The grabber wasn't listening. But just as it was about to grab hold of him, it stopped. There stood the Fat Controller. "It's a good thing I've chosen to visit this yard tonight. Saving you from scrap is getting to be a habit, Stepney. Please stop it." "Yes, sir, but I have learned something." "What's that?" "There's no place like home." "And that's exactly where you're going now." "Bluebells forever," sighed Stepney.
Snow came early to the island of Sodor. It was heavier than usual. Most engines hate snow. Donald and Douglas were used to it. Coupled back to back with a van between their tenders and a snowplow on their fronts, they set to work. They puffed backwards and forwards, patrolling the line. Generally, the snow slipped away easily, but sometimes they found deeper drifts. Presently, they came to a drift which was larger than most. They charged it and were just backing for another try when... "Help! Help! Lost six, Donald! It's Henry! Don't worry yourself, Henry! Wait a while! We'll have you out!" Henry was very grateful. He saw all was not well. The twins were looking glum. They told him Sir Topham Hatt was making a decision. "He'll send us away for sure." "It's a shame," said Percy. "A lot of nonsense about a broken signal box," grumbled Gordon. "That spiteful brake van, too," put in James. "Good riddance, that's what I say." "The twins were splendid in the snow," added Henry. "It isn't fair." They all agreed that something must be done, but none knew what. Percy decided to talk to Edward about it. "What you need," said Edward, "is a deputation." He explained what that was. Percy ran back quickly. "Edward says we need a depot station." "Of course," said Gordon. "The question is..." "What is a desperation?" asked Henry. "It's when engines tell Sir Topham Hatt something's wrong," said Percy. "Did you say tell Sir Topham Hatt?" asked Duck thoughtfully. There was a long silence. "I propose," said Gordon, "that Percy be our disputation." "Me?" squeaked Percy. "I can't." "Rubbish, Percy," said Henry. "It's easy." "That's settled, then," said Gordon. Poor Percy wished it wasn't. "Hello, Percy. It's nice to be back." Percy jumped. Yes, sir, please, sir." "You look nervous, Percy. What's the matter?" "Please, sir, they've made me a desperation, sir. To speak to you, sir. I don't like it, sir." Sir Topham Hatt pondered. "Do you mean a deputation, Percy?" "Yes, sir, please, sir. It's Donald and Douglas. They say, sir, that if you send them away, sir, well, they'll be turned into scrap, sir. That would be dreadful, sir. Please, sir, don't send them away." "Thank you, Percy. That will do." Later, Sir Topham Hatt spoke to the engines. "I had a A deputation. I understand your feelings, and I've given a lot of thought to the matter.
He paused impressively.
Donald and Douglas, I hear that your work in the snow was good. You shall have a new coat of paint. The twins were surprised. Thank ye, sir. But your names will be painted on you. We'll have no more mistakes. Thank ye, sir. Does this mean that the both of us? Sir Topham Hatt smiled. It means... But the rest of his speech was drowned in a delighted chorus of cheers and whistles. The twins were here to stay.